I don't think people understand just how thrilling, dangerous and dramatic Shakespeare's Richard III really is. Welcome to Mindful Melodies Mansion, where learning comes alive through stories, history and drama. Today we're stepping back into the Elizabethan era, a world of royal courts, dangerous politics and theatrical brilliance, to explore William Shakespeare's Richard III. But before we dive into the play, let's understand the man behind it and the world he lived in. William Shakespeare, born in 1564, was more than just a playwright. He was a storyteller who shaped the English language, theatre and literature forever. Writing during the Elizabethan era, a time of political uncertainty, religious tension and rapid change, Shakespeare's plays reflected the concerns of his society. England had just emerged from a bloody civil war, the Wars of the Roses, and now rested under the rule of Queen Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch. Her grandfather, Henry VII, had taken the throne by defeating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. This matters because when Shakespeare wrote Richard III, he wasn't just telling a story. He was writing history from the winner's point of view and crafting a tale that would please his Tudor audience. But he also raised big questions. What makes someone evil? How does power corrupt? And can we trust the people who rule us? Let's find out. Now, let's meet the real man, King Richard III. Richard was born in 1452, part of the House of York, one of the two rival families fighting for the English throne. He was the brother of King Edward IV and served him loyally in battle and court. When Edward died in 1483, his 12-year-old son, Edward V, was supposed to become king. But Richard declared the boy illegitimate, locked him and his brother in the Tower of London, and took the crown for himself. The boys disappeared. Their fate remains one of the greatest mysteries in British history. Most historians believe they were murdered, and many blame Richard. Richard's reign was short and troubled. Just 2 years later, in 1485, he was killed at the Battle of Bosworth by Henry Tudor, who became King Henry VII, the first Tudor king. And so, Shakespeare inherited a version of history where Richard was the ultimate villain, a symbol of tyranny defeated by Tudor virtue. But was he really that evil, or was it propaganda? Shakespeare's Richard III is a history play, but it's also a psychological thriller, a tale of manipulation, ambition and murder. Let's break it down scene by scene so students can follow every twist. The play opens with one of Shakespeare's most famous lines, Richard V.O. Now is the winter of our discontent. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, tells the audience he is bitter, deformed and dangerous, and that he plans to steal the throne. He begins by turning the court against his brother, Clarence, and arranging his murder. He then pretends to mourn Clarence's death. Next, in a shocking scene, Richard seduces Lady Anne, the widow of a man he murdered, just to gain political advantage. King Edward IV, Richard's brother, dies, leaving young Prince Edward as heir. Richard is made Lord Protector, responsible for the boy king's safety. But instead, he has Prince Edward and his brother imprisoned in the Tower of London. He spreads lies about their legitimacy, and with the help of corrupt allies like Buckingham, he arranges to be crowned King Richard III. Once Richard becomes king, his descent accelerates. He orders the murder of the princes in the Tower. He kills Lord Hastings without trial. He has his wife Queen Anne poisoned so he can marry his niece and solidify his power. He begins to lose control as guilt, paranoia and fear spread through the kingdom. Richmond, a nobleman and descendant of the Lancastrian line, rises up against Richard. Support for Richard crumbles. Even Buckingham turns on him. The country is in chaos and the people suffer under his rule. Richard prepares for battle, haunted by the ghosts of those he has murdered. At the Battle of Bosworth Field, Richard's army faces Richmond's. On the night before the battle, Richard is visited by the ghosts of his victims, who curse him and bless Richmond. The next day, Richard fights bravely, but is ultimately surrounded and killed. His final cry, Richard, Voe. A horse, my kingdom for a horse! Richmond is crowned Henry VII and peace is restored. The Wars of the Roses are over. This play is more than history. It's a warning. It shows how lies, ambition and cruelty can destroy a nation, and how tyranny always leads to downfall. At the centre of Richard III stands one of the most complex villains in all of Shakespeare Richard, Duke of Gloucester. Let's explore his mind, and then meet the characters he manipulates, betrays and destroys. Richard opens the play by telling us exactly what he is, Richard VO. I'm determined to prove a villain. He's self-aware, brilliant and terrifying. Unlike other characters, he speaks directly to the audience in soliloquies, drawing us into his schemes like co-conspirators. That's what makes him chilling. We see every trick before it happens. But Richard isn't just evil. He's also a man shaped by rejection. Shakespeare describes him as physically deformed, rudely stamped, unfinished. In a society obsessed with beauty and nobility, Richard sees himself as unwanted, unnatural and unloved. Instead of asking for pity, he chooses villainy. He manipulates others to feel powerful. He laughs at morality. He believes the world is cruel, so he becomes crueler. Richard is a master of language, twisting words into weapons, of deceit, fooling allies and enemies alike, of performance, pretending to be religious, loyal or loving when needed, yet beneath his control lies a deep fear of being powerless. As his crimes grow, his grip weakens. He becomes paranoid, haunted and finally alone. By the final act, even Richard begins to fall apart. Richard, Voe. There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul shall pity me. In the end, he's not just a tyrant, he's a tragedy. Lady Anne is one of Richard's earliest victims. In a shocking scene, Richard convinces her to marry him, even though he murdered her husband and father-in-law. Why does she say yes? Some say she's weak, caught in a world where women have no power. Others say she's traumatized, isolated and manipulated. Shakespeare shows us how even intelligent people can be tricked, especially when grief and fear are involved. Anne later disappears from the stage, likely murdered. Another life crushed by Richard's ambition. Queen Elizabeth is the widow of King Edward IV and the mother of the two princes. She's one of the few characters who stands up to Richard, especially after he takes her sons. Her confrontations are fierce. Shall I be tempted of the devil thus? She mourns, resists, and eventually outsmarts Richard by promising her daughter to Richmond, sealing the future of the Tudor dynasty. Buckingham starts as Richard's right hand. He helps him rise, spreads lies and organises the murder of the princes. But when Richard refuses to reward him, Buckingham turns against him. His story shows us that evil alliances never last, and loyalty built on power, not principle, will always collapse. Richmond appears late in the play, but he represents a new dawn. He's everything Richard is not: moral, noble and merciful. Before battle he prays. After winning, he marries Elizabeth's daughter, uniting the warring houses and ending the Civil War. Richmond becomes Henry VII, the founder of the Tudor dynasty, the very family Shakespeare served. The princes in the tower, innocent children silenced by power. Queen Margaret, the ghost of the past, cursing everyone in the present. Lord Hastings, loyal but naive, murdered without trial. The ghosts, victims who return to haunt Richard and bless Richmond. Each character shows a different face of power. Those who seek it, lose it, fear it, or are destroyed by it. Shakespeare's Richard III isn't just a play about a villain, it's a lesson about the dangers of power, the pain of war, and the cost of silence. Let's break down the major themes that students need to understand deeply. Conflict is the heartbeat of this play. It pulses through every scene, every relationship, every battle. Family conflict. Richard betrays his own brothers. The Wars of the Roses tore England's royal family apart. Political conflict. Noblemen switch sides. Power changes hands quickly. No one is safe. Inner conflict. While Richard seems confident, his final scenes reveal a man crumbling under guilt and fear. "O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me?" Shakespeare shows that unchecked ambition leads to constant war, both on the battlefield and in the soul. Richard lies, pretends, flatters and manipulates. He pretends to be holy to fool the crowd. He pretends to mourn Clarence after arranging his death. He pretends to love Lady Anne after murdering her husband. Every lie moves him closer to the crown. But Shakespeare also warns us, lies unravel. Truth finds a way to return. By the end, Richard can't trust anyone, not even himself. His world, built on lies, collapses. This teaches students a key idea. Tyrants use lies to gain power, but lies cannot protect them forever. Richard begins as a duke. He becomes a king, but he never becomes a leader. He rules with fear, violence and cruelty. He silences critics, executes rivals and crushes hope. But Shakespeare doesn't just show us a tyrant. He shows us how a society allows tyranny to rise. People ignore Richard's early crimes. The nobles go along with his plans. The citizens stay silent. It's only when he turns on everyone and starts killing without reason that they rebel. This teaches a powerful message. Tyranny is not just one person's fault. It grows when good people do nothing. Richard believes he can control everything. He makes every decision with confidence. But Shakespeare introduces fate through dreams, curses and ghosts. Queen Margaret curses those who wronged her. The ghosts of Richard's victims appear on the night before battle. Richard starts to fear he is doomed. This raises questions. Are tyrants punished by fate, or do they destroy themselves? Students can explore how Shakespeare blends supernatural warnings with real-world consequences. At the end of the play, Richard is gone. Richmond takes his place. Peace is restored, but the scars remain. Shakespeare reminds us that power built on violence creates lasting pain. And the only way to heal a nation is through justice, unity, and truth. William Shakespeare didn't just write plays, he built worlds out of words. Every line in Richard III is carefully crafted to shape how we see Richard, feel his evil, and understand the political world he manipulates. Let's break down the literary tools and devices students need to recognize and why they matter so much. Richard is famous for his soliloquies, long speeches where he talks directly to us, sharing his secret plans and inner thoughts. Richard, VO. I am determined to prove a villain, narrator, VO. These speeches do two things: expose Richard's mind, his confidence, his cruelty, and his loneliness. Draw the audience in. We become like co-conspirators, watching his rise and fall from inside his mind. In performance, this makes Richard both frightening and fascinating. We understand his evil because we've heard it straight from his lips. Shakespeare uses dramatic irony to create tension. That's when the audience knows something the characters don't. We know Richard's lies, we see the traps he sets, but the characters in the play trust him until it's too late. This creates suspense. We watch helpless as each victim walks toward their doom. Richard doesn't just speak. He paints with language. He calls himself a bottled spider and poisonous bunchback toad, symbols of deceit and monstrosity. He uses animal imagery to describe others, boars, lambs, wolves, reducing them to prey or enemies. He compares his rise to a storm and his enemies to shadows, shaping power with poetic violence. Ask students, what do these metaphors tell us about Richard's view of himself, and how do they shape our own view of him? Most of Richard III is written in Iambic pentameter, 10-syllable lines with a da-dum rhythm. This rhythm gives the play a heartbeat, makes speeches easier to memorize, and highlights important lines when broken. For example, Richard says, "Was ever woman in this humour wooed? Was ever woman in this humour won?" Here, Shakespeare uses rhythm and repetition to show Richard's arrogance, celebrating how he manipulated Lady Anne. Shakespeare loves sound and contrast. Alliteration involves repeating consonants for emphasis. For example, Richard says, "Plots have I laid, inductions dangerous." Antithesis is about putting opposites together. Richard again, "The world is grown so bad that wrens make prey where eagles dare not perch." And then there's wordplay. Richard often plays with double meanings, especially when deceiving others. He uses clever language as a weapon. Encourage students to find these devices in the script. Everyone reveals something about the speaker's intentions and Shakespeare's message. Richard often repeats key ideas, power, betrayal, fate, to hammer in his thoughts. He also uses rhetorical questions to manipulate others. For instance, why I can smile and murder whilst I smile. These techniques emphasize his control of speech, build his image as a mastermind, and make him persuasive even when he's lying. Shakespeare uses supernatural elements to explore guilt and justice. Queen Margaret curses the characters who wronged her, and her predictions come true. The ghosts of Richard's victims appear in Act 5, reminding him and the audience of every sin he committed. These ghostly scenes use repetition, imagery, and symbolism to show Richard's crumbling soul. Understanding Shakespeare's language helps students unlock the play's power and prepares them to analyze deeper works like Macbeth, where every word carries moral weight.